Morning, everyone. A warm welcome to the third lecture of the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall. I am Rozwana Begum from Singapore University of Social Sciences, and truly humbled and pleased to be the moderator for this lecture with President José Ramos-Horta. Thank you, FPCI, for this opportunity. The Southeast Asia Lecture Hall is a free, independent, people-to-people program that aims to provide free and regular access to Southeast Asian students and lecturers to world-class lectures from various fields of study. Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia has partnered with various universities across Southeast Asia. We would like to thank our partners from across the region. Let me begin with American University of Phnom Penh, Binus University, Champasak University, Chiang Mai University, Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, Far Eastern University, Institute of Business Timor-Leste, International Islamic University Malaysia, LSPR Communication and Business Institute, Mahidol University, National University of Singapore, New Era University, Paragon International University, President University, Savanakat University, Singapore Management University, Singapore University of Social Sciences, Subhanawong University, Thammasat University, UCSI Malaysia, UIN Sunan Ampel Surabaya, University 17 August 1945 Jakarta, University Airlangga, University Andalas, University Bosowa, University Bundi Luhur, University Gadjah Mada, University Hasanuddin, University General Ahmad Yani, University Kristen Satya Wacana, University Mataram, University Muhammadiyah Jemper, University Pasundan Bandung, University Samratulangi, University Mamat Riyandi, University Sumatera Utara, University Tanjung Pura, University Kebangsaan Malaysia, University Putra Malaysia, University of Mandalay, University of Nottingham Malaysia, Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, Yale NUS College, and Yangon University of Economics. And we expect many more universities to become a partner of this program in the future. Today marks our third lecture in this lecture hall series. We are very honored and blessed to have President José Ramos-Horta. President José served as President of Timor-Leste from May 20th, 2007 to May 20th, 2012. Previously, he served as Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2002 to 2006 and as Prime Minister from 2006 to 2007. His role as an international mediator and peacemaker was internationally recognized. Together with Carlos Philippine Ximenes Bello, they were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1996 in recognition of work for a just and peaceful resolution of the conflict in East Timor. Before I hand the floor over to President Ramos-Horta, let me read out the classroom rules for those joining on Zoom. Please mute your audio. Please keep your camera on, and name must be renamed according to the format stated in the chat box. For all students tuning in, make sure to stay until the end of the lecture. The committee will send out a link on both Zoom and YouTube chat box to confirm your attendance and for you to get your e-certificate. So do not forget to fill out the form. Also, feel free to have discussion with your fellow classmates in the chat box. That will be all from me. President Ramos-Horta, the floor is yours. President, please.
Good morning, everybody participating in this dialogue. And as we start, I wish to thank my good friend, Dinu Jalal, and the whole people in the foreign policy community of Indonesia for once again inviting me to be a part of this wonderful initiative. And to start, I think I would start with a positive note. In the midst of this extraordinary crisis in the world, crisis of leadership, crisis of institutions, a weakening of multilateral system that was basically started or exacerbated in 2017 with coming to power with President Donald Trump, and the deterioration of relationship between the United States and even allies. And then came the COVID pandemic, and with it, this extraordinary meltdown of economies around the world, which threw back into extreme poverty hundreds of millions of people, and including children. And in fact, as I'm speaking to you now, in New York, in the UN General Assembly, on the 22nd, I am participating via Zoom on a side event with my friend, the Nobel Peace Prize of 2014, Kailash Satyarthi from India, who is the great global advocate against child slavery, child labor. An initiative that we launched and on a sideline event in New York with many speakers, including the Prime Minister of Sweden. And I'm speaking from here, alerting the world community to the exacerbation of an already unforgivable crisis in the world. And that is that we are in the 21st century, and yet we still have child labor and child slavery across the world. And but being here from Dili, Timor-Leste, I must also say, in spite of all our troubles that common to everyone, we are finally, after 1 year, 2020, almost completely free of COVID. Now we are living with it. And we also suffer the consequence of the economic meltdown. But this remains an island of tranquility, an island of peace, of tolerance among the many people who live in our country. But moving on to Indonesia, the good news is Indonesia, the largest majority Muslim country in the world, in a very fragile geographic area. It is right in the middle of the ring of fire, victim again and again of earthquakes, tsunamis, and then occasionally every year forest fires. And yet it remains one of the most inclusive, tolerant countries in the world. And it is becoming increasingly a regional and global economic dynamo. At least according to projections, in another 30, 40 years, maybe more, maybe less, Indonesia will be the third or fourth largest economy of the world. So these are the good news from the region. Before I talk to you about what is mostly bad news around the world. Talking about Asia Pacific region, about the news so-called Indo-Pacific and region. Because we invent different strategic regions to suit our immediate medium-term strategic security, political, economic interest. To build alliances, we concoct new security strategic regions. And so the new one is the so-called Indo-Pacific. But wherever we look at Latin America, we look at continental Africa, Europe, and across Asia, there are extraordinary challenges of countries at war, countries in political, social, economic turmoil across Latin America. And what was a dynamo of Latin America economy and peace and stability, Brazil, is in great social political turmoil. And of course, there are others that I will not list all. Africa, the promising continent of more than 1 billion, mostly young people, unlike Europe, aging population, unlike Asia, China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, aging population. Africa is still mostly young because you need young people, young educated people to build superpowers, to build powers, to build empires, so to speak. You cannot be a global empire, you cannot be a global superpower of everyone or 60%, 50%, or 40% of your people over the age 70. So Africa is still a young continent with all the strategic resources we can think of. That is coveted by the United States, by China, by India, and so on. However, Africa also has incredible challenges, precisely from the population growth, pressure on resources, conflicts among many African countries, extremism, and so on, and how to handle the strategic rivalry of superpowers and other not superpowers, but important powers in Europe and elsewhere. Then we come to the Asia region. Time and again, over the years, I hear about the Asia century. Asia, the 21st century belongs to Asia. It's the Asia century. I would say yes and no. The yes, the possibility, obviously, but if we piggyback on the Chinese economic success that many call economic miracle of the last 40 years, yes, Asia has grown economically, technically speaking, scientific, exponentially. And Asia today has more liquidity in cash than most of the industrialized countries combined. However, having said that, also extreme poverty is still rampant throughout Asia. And home to half of the world population. The world population is roughly 8 billion people, about roughly 4 billion are in Asia. And the largest percentage of the world's poor are concentrated in Asia, partly, obviously, because of the population, proportionally speaking. And what does this mean also? It means enormous pressure over decades on our own environment. Pressure on the land, exploitation of the land, even just to feed ourselves, agriculture. Huge pressure on water resources with countries across Asia. We read the news, we saw the news in the last few months about extraordinary drought in India with a lack of water in many parts of India. But it's not only India, elsewhere around Asia, there are challenges in what I call water security and water stress countries. And there are some countries that are very fortunate, do not have problems of water resources, and that is Myanmar. But countries like mine, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, particularly Eastern Indonesia, and elsewhere throughout the region, we have extraordinary challenges because of environmental degradation, climate change, but also because of waste and industrial impact on our water resources, poisoning water resources, and overuse. Australia, the driest continent of the world, has one of the most water consumed for agriculture. And as much as we develop tourism, Indonesia, particularly Bali, has extraordinary success in attracting tourists, which is very important. But at the same time, it puts enormous pressure on Bali water resources. So these are some of the preliminary problems that I put and that Asian leaders have to urgently look at on how to rescue our extremely damaged environments, impacting on forest areas, impacting on fresh water resources. And as water diminish severely, if we do not take care of this sacred gift from God, water, well, one day we will kill each other over water. And that is a serious potential for war. And it's not new. Over centuries, communities fought each other over water. And in small scale and one day in larger scale. Just look at the tensions in the Middle East, Israel, Jordan, Palestinian, Lebanon, Syria, and other countries confronting water resources. And look at the potential for serious war between Ethiopia and Egypt over the Renaissance Dam that Ethiopia is building and almost completing, and that is feared by Egypt and others on the downstream of the Nile River. But while Asia has made extraordinary advances, yes, obviously it's not only China. We forget often Republic of Korea, one extraordinary democracy, dynamic democracy, but also enormously rich out of their own resilience, their hard work, their ethics, their sense of national pride to turn Republic of Korea from extreme poverty after the Korean War in the 60s into one of the richest countries of the world. And obviously Japan, destroyed after World War II, but the great Japanese people endure atomic bombs, the only people in the world who have endured atomic bomb. I don't go into the reasons for it, but the fact is the Japanese were brought down to their knees, surrender in humility, and rebuild their country to become a peaceful country and one of the greatest contributors to peace and development in Asia, and in support of the UN and other multilateral agencies. So it's not only Chinese growth, but others. India has made tremendous progress. But there are problems that we have to cannot fail to address, and that the nuclearization of Asia. I wonder how often you participants in this room conference have thought about that. That A, there are fortunately no nuclear weapons anywhere in Latin America. Not that they don't have the capability. Brazil can produce nuclear weapons, so would be Argentina and maybe Chile. And during the apartheid era, before the end of apartheid, South Africa was a nuclear capable country. But Mandela, the great Mandela, whom I had the privilege of meeting more than once, dismantled South Africa nuclear weapons. And then Gaddafi in Libya also dismantled. Maybe he regretted and having done that because the Americans, the French, the British, using a Security Council mandate to authorize humanitarian intervention in Benghazi, instead turned it into regime change, and Gaddafi was killed. So anyway, Africa has no nuclear weapons. Europe, only two countries, UK and France. But I can guarantee you, UK and France are not pointing the nuclear weapons into each other. I don't know who they are pointed to, definitely not to the United States. I doubt it is pointed to Iran. And probably they themselves don't know where to point their nuclear weapons, because the rationale for European nuclear weapons long past after the end of sorry, hello. Sorry, I switch off a bit to have a properly drink my water, and so I continue. So the rationale for European nuclearization, particularly of France and UK, outdated. So I doubt they pointed their nuclear weapons at anyone. Then we have Asia. Well, too many nuclear weapons in Asia. Obviously not in terms of number of warheads, but in terms of countries possessing nuclear weapons, it is unique in the world. It's the largest. Of course, in terms of nuclear stockpile, of course, it is Russia, it's United States that have the most nuclear weapons. But in terms of countries and dangerously close to each other, with conflicting claims on territorial and maritime boundaries, and that is India and Pakistan, then India and China, both are nuclear weapon countries, China itself, and then in North Korea. The estimate is that they already have 200 nuclear weapons. And of course, Israel is one in the Middle East, but no one else in the Middle East possesses nuclear weapons. And then you have territorial disputes, very sensitive, India, Pakistan over Kashmir, and the tensions in the South China Sea, which is inviting extra regional countries to test the waters and to challenge Chinese claims at the 9-dash line. And we see now the new US, UK, and Australia alliance, which is not stated, but it's obvious it is to counter China. But beyond that, besides that create extraordinary risk for Asia region. You know, you have the more weaponry introduced in the South China Sea, the more weapons introduced in the vicinity of the Korean Peninsula, which is already hugely weaponized. North Korea, South Korea, American military presence in South Korea, plus US military presence in Japan, Okinawa, and China with its over several million people on arms. So this is unique. There's nothing like that in Africa, in Latin America, or even Europe. That's why I say 20th century Asia, I say yes and no. Depends how Asian leaders address all these challenges. To sometimes I can say existential challenges to Asia. And because minor mistakes underestimate someone with jet fighters flying over the South China Sea area, the region, firing a missile by mistake, even human or technical, can quickly degenerate into bigger problems. But beyond that, you know, you look at the the population challenges, the aging challenge in Asia. China, which is a time bomb in terms of aging population, time bomb in terms of how it will address the livelihood of millions of Chinese will be over the age 65, 70, who will need support from their families and from the state. And how China is going to get enough manpower to continue its economic growth. And then the multiple challenges that China faces in dealing with its neighbors, the claimant states to the South China Sea, the rivalry, the unresolved legacies of World War II, China, Japan, Korea, that 70 years later is still on the agenda. So these are the issues that I often tell the more enthusiasts about rising Asia 21st century. Ideally would be institutions like ASEAN, which obviously is facing its own challenge. I wouldn't dare to say existential challenge, but I would dare to say a real challenge to the so-called ASEAN way of mediation, resolving conflicts, and the ASEAN way of, and the ASEAN centrality. And that is a problem in Myanmar. If ASEAN failed to address that, what is the meaning of ASEAN way and ASEAN centrality? But nevertheless, these challenges, I leave it to the leaders and people in the region to address. Confirm my doubts, my skepticism about Asia 21st century. A century is marked only by economic growth, is marked by our intellectual, literary, philosophical production, by our writers, our artists, by our scientists, who discover cures for the illnesses, who resolve problems of humanity, of problems of extreme poverty, and so on. And that is what Asia century is. Not only this dizzying, frenzy economic growth that often leave too many behind. Too many millions do not see it, and tens of millions do not see the results of the economic growth. Because we all know in economics, the fastest, the highest the economic growth, the more chances for corruption, for abuse, and for leaving many behind. Of course, some benefit, and we've seen the improvement of the lives of people throughout Asia, but still a long way to go. What is the solution? I would say not being possible to individual countries to resolve problems of the entire region. There has to be increasing strengthening of ASEAN partnerships, of greater dialogue between within ASEAN and ASEAN with Northeast Asia. Just imagine if the leaders of China, Korea, and Japan were to come to an understanding and finally put behind World War II legacies and understand that the fate of all of Asia and the world must depend on their cooperation as well. Can you imagine the resources of China, Japan, and Korea? And to that you add ASEAN, particularly Indonesia, and to that you add India. But India, which with Pakistan must have the ability to resolve Kashmir and their respective land boundaries disputes, India and China. That, yes, we would see extraordinary new century for Asia. But what are the secrets or the ingredients and the key elements in successful leadership and in successful regional partnerships to in handling tensions and conflicts? Well, obviously, there is no substitute for one, and that's leadership. There are abundant lessons of leadership in the world history in Asia. Lessons, positive lessons of great leaders, leaders who have changed their countries from poverty, from conflict into peace, and the leaders who have led their country into wars and misery, destruction. I will not mention specific names of leaders or countries, partly out of caution, not to offend anyone. But each of you who participate in these are obviously students or practitioners. You would know the leaders in Asia who have made a difference in their countries, made a difference for good, but leaders in Asia who, through their catastrophic leadership, led their countries to wars, to self-destruction, and to incredible traumas that lasted generations. In some still today. So one quality is leaders who are gifted by God, by nature, by education in the family, in the community, with vision, with intelligence, with humility. Humility of the truly great. Because people who are truly great, they are humble. And they never minimize, humiliate their adversaries. Leaders who have a heart for their people, who above all truly care about the poorest of their society, of their country, and do everything to uplift, to improve the lives of the people. Leaders who, once in power, they are not blinded by power. Leaders who embrace their enemies. And let me tell you, I don't like the word enemy. I never use. So let me say, their adversaries. But for them, it was their enemy. Embrace them. And if they are on their knees, and when I say enemies or adversaries, domestic or external, when they are on their knees, lift them up, embrace them, invite them to join you in a new enterprise of rebuilding the wounded nation, a new enterprise of rebuilding the country for everyone. To learn, to remember the ugliness of war that destroy country, that kill families, separate communities, and so on. And so that is leaders. And there are examples of that around the world, examples of that in Asia, in our vicinity. But leaders who brought tragedies to their countries and to the region, to the world. Then a second point in leadership for me, and that is accessibility, because humility means accessibility. In this 21st century of interconnectivity, of connectivity, of an increasingly smaller world with its advantages and the problems. So much easier for leaders to stay connected with their people. Some have a physical connection with their people. You must be always visible to your people. You must be always close to your people. And of course, I know there are security risks nowadays. We know from the assassination of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Isaac Rabin, and others in history. And the closeness, physical closeness brings, but you cannot be hostage of that. You have to go out and meet the people to unite the country and reach out to your neighbors and reach out to the countries that you might historically, for good reasons, have a suspicion, have a resentment because of history. Reach out to them, because that's the only way for ASEAN and other regional countries, blocs, to thrive and to together address security, political, economic, social challenges. One example, in these pandemic times, in these times of so many sad news invading our homes, families. Well, for instance, one failure, I think, in ASEAN, I might be wrong because I'm not 100% familiar with all the institutions, the initiatives ASEAN create, and that is a joint strategy, pooling resources, scientific, technical, human, doctors, in combating COVID-19 and other previous pandemics that have impacted the region. Why wouldn't we have an ASEAN-wide, an ASEAN institution and the hospitals to deal with these pandemics? I haven't seen it. I haven't read much about how ASEAN countries send doctors here and there, from Indonesia to Malaysia, Malaysia to Indonesia, Thailand to Indonesia, to the Indonesian islands, and so on behalf of ASEAN. For instance, I have to bring an extra regional country, and that is Cuba. Well, we are relatively successful in managing COVID pandemic here. Of course, the dedication of our doctors and nurses, but also because of international support. We have a great dedicated group of Cuban doctors here for already over 10 years. They've been here. 150 Cuban doctors, specialists. Also, obviously, we have some doctors from China, much fewer. And then we have from Australia, great Australian doctors and nurses who are here. And some Indonesians who have been here before. And many Timorese graduated in medicine in Indonesia, but many more studied in Cuba and in our School of Medicine set up by the Cubans. But we have a very distant country, Cuba, tens of miles away, thousands of miles away, that deployed doctors here as they deployed to the South Pacific region, to Africa, to Latin America. So we should have ASEAN should have a flagship medical group that do that, because ASEAN has doctors, has science, has financial resources to do it. But there are other ways. Obviously, there are other lacking institutions or institutions that exist. And also, I have seen, haven't seen in this pandemic that South Korea, China, and Japan cooperate. China, yes, has done tremendous with the vaccines and doctors around the world, not only during pandemic, but before. But there should be joint initiatives between ASEAN and Northeast Asia. There should be joint initiatives between China and India. For God's sake, the leaders of China and India, stop this madness of nuclear weapons pointing at each other. Yes, I know this is a deterrent doctrine. You might never use it. God willing, you never use it. With God's inspiration, blessing, you never use it, because once someone uses it, it will be the end of both and of us. So what's the point of having nuclear weapons instead of embracing each other as people of the same subcontinent, and mobilize the greatest brains of India and Pakistan, of Pakistan, India, and China, and the rest of Asia, to really make Asia the 21st century Asia. I know I still have, according to the schedule, maybe 10, 15 minutes. I will continue a few more minutes. So the leadership is this: A, an extraordinary individual and individuals. Because let me tell you, and I can be contradicted, leaders, usually they are born leaders. They have this innate, this God-given quality of leaders. I saw it, I see it in my own country when I was a kid, a teenager. Some of my colleagues, that whenever they show up, we kids, we all go silent, we stop, we watch them. Nicolau Lobato, one a great Timorese leader who died in combat in 78, and Shanana Guzman. Some people might not like me mention a politician, but he was born a leader, and I watched him way back when he was a simple worker. And but then leaders develop and influenced by their milieu, where they live, by their context and their studies. And then, besides the qualities I mentioned already, then a humble leader easily understand the connectivity with the people, easily understand that leader has to be compassion that comes from his heart, because only humility and compassion lead you to inspire you, or to resolve differences in the country. In many multi-ethnic, multi-religious countries, Indonesia is one, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Turkey is the one. Well, you have many, many different ethnic nationalities, languages. A truly visionary leader who is humble and brilliant, well, he sees these differences as tremendous blessing from God. The greater the diversity, the more blessed is the country. Indonesia is an example of that. And but so are other countries. But there are many countries. Even Europe, before democracy was prevailed in Spain, the Franco dictatorship abused, humiliated, tried to delete the Basque people, their language, their way of being. Well, many were killed. There are decades of war, of conflict, and finally with democracy. But even with democracy, it took time for the Basque country, for ETA, the terrorist group there, to end its violence. But so in Northern Ireland, between the British and the Catholic Irish and so on. So it's not only a phenomenon of Asia, Africa, or so there are also the Europeans are too familiar with that. Leaders have to have the ability to reach out to all the nationalities, because you cannot just want the territory. You want a territory that is inhabited by other people for hundreds of years, thousands of years before you became a country, or before you are unified. When you unify the territory, you unify the people, you brought them under your administration. Well, what you want the people to do? Wish them away, disappear, so that you keep calmly the territory? No, you have to embrace them as children of the country, children of God. And that can be done only by visionary leaders and leaders who have a heart and humility. And the leaders of such nature, they know how to have around them like-minded people. And these are some of the most important qualities of leadership. You can have a PhD, but your PhD doesn't necessarily make you a leader. Make you a thinker, make you a planner, make you a good communicator, but only with Zoom conferences or with your own computer. You are not a leader. Yes, you can provide abundant information for the leader. So for me, priority number one is not university education. University education obviously can help, but there have been other leaders around our history who didn't have university education, who don't have university education. They are just brilliant and they learn just very fast. Of course, the more languages you speak, the better. I have to say, we Timorese, maybe because they're a small country, because of our history, Timorese are very polyglot. Any Timorese can easily speak 3, 4, 5 languages. In another 10 years, 15 years, probably Timor-Leste will be the most polyglot country in Asia. English is expanding here. Bahasa Indonesia is still here, and probably even more now than before. And our own national language, obviously Tetum, which is a mix of Tetum itself, of Portuguese and Bahasa, and is expanding. And the Portuguese expanding here, contrary to some people in the past 20 years ago that Portuguese would disappear. No, it's actually expanded dramatically, much more than before independence, during Portuguese time, more than during Portuguese time. And many Timorese speak Spanish because of relationship with Cuba, study medicine. Many Timorese speak Korean language because to go to work in Korea, study Korean, to speak Korean. They speak in Chinese because they also relationship with China. So Timorese learn a language, foreign language in 3 months, 6 months. So congratulations to my young compatriots because they learn a new language in 3, 6 months. It took me more than that, 1 year at least, to learn a foreign language. So I advise you people who are listening to me, those are young and not so young, language for communication, not only English that dominate our communication. And learn as many languages as you can. Because with languages, and that means easier travel, easier communication, we build connected societies. We build brotherhood, sisterhood societies in that we communicate easily. We know each other. We study each other's history, culture. Because I wonder how many writers, authors in Indonesia, for instance, they know about writers of Thailand, of the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, and the vice versa. This is supposed to be an ASEAN community. And I wonder how many authors from different ASEAN countries are published elsewhere in another ASEAN country in the local language. And fortunately, English remains the language of connectivity for at least for the elites, for those who do business. And the languages is a good academic, intellectual exercise for our brains, learning languages. And then last but not least, some remarks on how, because peace is not, you do not achieve by talking peace. we look at the root causes of conflicts in many countries in the region. One of the root causes of these conflicts that go on and on in many countries is, as I mentioned before, particularly in multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religion societies. When one group, usually the majority ethnic group, that claim the whole territory inhabited by so many other groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, trying to make everybody the same in their image, thinking the same. And at the same time, the larger ethnic group slowly, and of course, over the years, encroaching on the territory, exploit the resources, and the people in these gifted territories, gifted by nature, see their environment destroyed, and they benefit very little from their own minerals, oil, gas, and whatever. And this happens around the world. This is one of the root causes of conflicts. And there are others that I already mentioned in the sense that when a leader is in power, do not seek to humiliate the defeated political parties. Because in our many countries, political parties often are based on ethnic loyalties and friendships, family connections, community connections, and so on. And if they lose and you take revenge in denying them opportunities, well, then you are sowing the seeds of reaction and maybe conflict. So the ingredients, the best elements for a successful peacemaking, bridge building is precisely this. And when I talk about leadership, I'm not only talking about national leadership. If you investigate conflict in some countries, in a particular city, where in some areas of a capital city, a big city, the area is very peaceful, another area is very violent. Well, you will find leadership problems. In the areas where there is no conflict, the local leaders, the elected or traditional leader is a person, man or woman, of great qualities, that is able to keep his community, her community together. We talk about church, confessional, mosque leaders. Indonesia is a good example of that. Not only it has had great leaders since its independence, who has fostered these cultural and diversity living together. But there have been also religious leaders, particularly two great religious groups, Islamic groups, Nadatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah. The two institutions, together over 100 million people in their membership, that are credit for keeping Indonesia with the largest majority Muslim country in the world, very tolerant, very embracing of everybody. But it has to do more in preserving peace and understanding. And of course, there are other countries successful in the region. I'm not saying only, Singapore is a great example of that as well, of is smaller, a smaller melting pot, but enormously successful. And so is Malaysia, so is Philippines, with ethnic diversity. And that is a result not only of the national leaders, because national leaders come and go, particularly those who are elected You change every 4 years, 5 years, or maximum maybe 10 years. So much depends on the role of youth leaders. You have a great role in that to build peace in your communities, in your country. Local leaders, village leaders, and regional leaders, and then academia, intellectual, academics, professors, school teachers. And when I mention religions, I mean every religion, not only Muslims, Catholic, Protestants, all other religions, Buddhists, Hindus, because that's the only way. There are no shortcuts to peace. There are no miracles, no easy answers. And it required patience. It required time. There are no shortcuts. Countries that want to invest in peace, in long-lasting peace, have to think long-term. And will Afghanistan ever be able to finally live as a country, as a, who knows? India still has some serious challenges. I don't know if, of course, Indians know and Pakistanis know, but I don't know if other people outside India know that, of course, Indonesia has the largest Muslim majority in the world. But the second is not, obviously not Saudi Arabia, not Pakistan, is India. It has the second largest Muslim population in the world, if I'm not mistaken. I think my data might be outdated, but and Pakistan and Iran, Iran, which is notorious in its human rights record, in intolerance towards people of other beliefs. The only way you win over the world, you win over your own people. You win over your own people by embracing everyone in sincerity, not in easy speeches, not in rhetoric, and then without delivering, without the people seeing in real life. So these are my contribution today as, I wouldn't say a lecture. I have some written notes, but I hardly look at the notes, some points here. So I talk mostly from my heart and the head, imagining that I'm talking to mostly youth across Asia, across the world, who have signed in to this great initiative of my friend Dino Jalal and others in the foreign policy community of Indonesia. I thank you all, and I wait for the next session, which is Q&A.
Thank you very much.
God bless you all.
Thank you very much, President Jose Ramos, for this enlightening talk. You have raised several key questions facing Asia and the world, mainly in the area of non-traditional security threats such as climate change, water scarcity, and its implication. You also highlighted the role of the leaders in peace building, involving all stakeholders. And I personally have learned from you from this talk that peace requires clarity, cooperation, and compassion, and that conflict resolution can only happen over time. We need to be patient, and there's a requirement for us to co-create with different stakeholders and to basically, be humble in our approach. So with that, I would like to perhaps, open, I see a lot of hands coming up. We will now be taking questions. So let me start with the ones on Zoom first. I will go according to the country that I've seen here. Perhaps let me start with Philippines. I have Isaiah Robert. Do you have a question for President Ramos, please? You can just unmute yourself and ask the question.
All right, hello. I would like to first greet everyone. Good day and good morning, or good day to everyone wherever you may be in the world. So first, I would like to thank Southeast Asian Lecture Hall for this wonderful opportunity, and President Ramos-Horta for gracing us with his presence and sharing us his knowledge about peace studies. And also greet my fellow Filipinos, especially my colleagues in New Year University and my fellow ASEAN neighbors. Good day to everyone. So I would like to ask President Ramos-Horta first two questions. How do you think the conflict, the brewing conflict here in the Sea region, Southeast Asian region, how do you think ASEAN leaders should handle China? Because, we are by ourselves, we cannot handle China by ourselves. So what do you think should we do about it? Should we rely on the United States if there are any possible conflicts? And I would like to ask also a personal question to President Ramos-Horta, because most of us here will not be able to get an opportunity like this to speak to a former head of state. So I would just like to think you have faced so many challenges throughout your presidency. You even survived an assassination attempt in your life in your early years of your presidency. So how does it feel like to be a president of a country? So that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to hear your answer, President. Thank you so much.
So do I answer now?
Yes, please, President. Please
Okay.
proceed. Yes.
Okay. First, who am I to appear, and I don't want to appear to be telling ASEAN leaders, Asian leaders how to handle China, etc., etc. But I'm not talking to ASEAN leaders. I'm talking to students. So I feel a bit freer, not so reluctant. And because ASEAN leaders and diplomats have greater experience than me. And but I would say the following, which is not secret. It is ASEAN mission. It was created at the end, almost at the end of, before the end of the Vietnam War, almost at the end, by visionary leaders. And it's made entire sense to create that regional organization. And that over the years, decades, perfected into, I would say, because I'm familiar with all the international, regional, multilateral architecture. And I'm familiar with the European Union very well. And I'm very familiar with the African Union and some of its sub-regional organizations. And the Organization of American States, League of Arab States, etc., etc. And less familiar with South Asian regional organization, less familiar with Central Eastern Europe integration organization. But ASEAN reasonably familiar, and it has made tremendous progress, and it is the only regional organization, and I have to say that's not even representing the whole of Asia. It's just the 10 ASEAN countries, and hopefully in a year or two, it will add one, Timor-Leste. We have done everything to merit trust from our ASEAN brothers leaders to welcome us in. We have made tremendous progress. So we would be 11. But look, it's the only organization that I know of that whenever it has summits, leaders from the United States, the American president, the Chinese president, the Korean president, Australian prime minister, Canadian prime minister, European leaders, European Union, Japan prime minister, everybody descend on the capital hosting the ASEAN summit to have a photo opportunity and a dialogue with the ASEAN leaders. And that is unique. I don't know of any other. That even the European Union, whenever they have a summit of head of state and head of government meeting, you don't see the Americans rushing in. Of course, they have ongoing easy relationship, but so I'm very impressed with that. That is a sign of success, credibility of leadership of ASEAN. But this success is being challenged by the tragic developments in Myanmar. And then let's not underestimate the problems of Myanmar. and ASEAN leaders know better than I. The strategic location of Myanmar, the fragility of that country, the mismanagement by it, by the military for the past 60 years, and the continuing extraordinary mismanagement. So that's why I believe ASEAN leaders probably are focusing on that, and they are frustrated, obviously, with that, because the military Myanmar, through their actions, are the ones undermining what has been an extraordinary success, the ASEAN organization. Having said that, on regard to relationship with China, how to deal, extraordinarily difficult. We have a claimant states in the South China Sea. It's not only one or two, you have several claimant states. And but beyond that, the problem was the South China Sea. China still have unresolved challenges. Taiwan, how to resolve that problem? You have Hong Kong. We know there's the tense situation, violent situation of 2 years ago, and other regions of China. So, and the relationship, China and North Korea, China and South Korea, China and Japan. So China, unlike the United States, which is very fortunate by geography, the Americans obviously were way back 100 years ago, maybe people with great vision back then, they decided to take territories one after another. Before they bought Alaska, very cheaply, can you imagine? I think $50 million or whatever was the price of it from the Russians. Then they took over Hawaii, which is a great strategic location projecting into the Pacific. And of course, 2/3 of the Mexico, you know, maybe the figure is wrong, but so much territory taken from Mexico. And then into the Pacific, Atlantic, there are no competing claims. The vast oceans are American oceans. They navigate, they travel, they move there easily. So a superpower, can you imagine a superpower who is landlocked? China has this unfortunate geographic situation that it has to the north, Russia, which fears China, fear its numbers. And over the years, even during the communist era, you heard about the Sino-Soviet conflict, ideological conflict, and then now they have entertaining some important relationship, but how long that will last? Then China with all other countries in Asia, the land boundary, and difficult access. They want access to Indian Ocean, and one best gateway is through Myanmar. That's why the relationship with Myanmar. So China has this much more disadvantaged geographic situation than United States. Yeah, as you know, United States has as neighbor only Mexico, one side, and the north is Canada, literally. So they are fortunate, not blessed by God. You know, some Americans will say blessed by God. No, way back 100 years ago, they went in with force, they took over, they won wars, and simply bulldozed themselves in. But this does not diminish that it was done by people who back then, they saw how to expand, create the empire. And so China is in this difficult situation, and how, and that's why you have the problem in South China Sea. They want a modern China. Before we had the British ruled the waves, then came the Americans, and now the Chinese want their part for economic and strategic reasons. Very difficult to say that ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries have to lean on the United States. I would say, and that's what's been done, primacy to diplomacy, ASEAN diplomacy with China, again and again, patiently. The introduction of foreign forces in the region will only exacerbate tensions and they can lead to conflict. But China, which wishes to be a superpower with a global reach, which it is having, particularly financially, we know, we all know that, and it cannot maintain this momentum if it is engaged in bullying tactics in the South China Sea against its own neighbors. Any empire, any superpower need friends. The United States built an intricate, complex web of friends, of alliances around the world. The Europeans the same. And this has happened for centuries. And when you fail, you subdue your neighbors and other countries, you can subdue only for a time. So it is in the greater interest of China to act as a responsible superpower and engages in active diplomacy. What can be done, in the South China Sea? No one is going to surrender its claims. I don't imagine Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, anyone to surrender. It would be political suicide. It would be humiliation. It would be defeat without firing a shot. Maybe the best way is everyone bordering the so-called South China Sea meet, declare the South China Sea area, the whole area, a non-militarized, non-nuclear area, an area of cooperation, jointly administered by all the claimant states, and then no touching the economic underwater resources, gas, oil, or whatever else, but even on the surface of it, restricting fisheries to each country's territorial waters, because we all know how fish stock around the world have been depleted by overfishing by the Europeans first, depleted by Chinese merchant ships, fishing fleets, and by many countries, not only China, many countries, Japan, South Korea, and even Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, everyone, Thailand, in our coastal waters, in their EEZ, exclusive economic zone, rampant fishing and destroying fish stock. So it is in the common interest of the countries bordering South China Sea, instead of focusing on their territorial waters, EEZ claims, focusing first achieve non-militarized, meaning demilitarized, those who already have military installations there, turn the area into an area of peace and cooperation. Of course, you can have military vessels passing through, it's unrealistic to them. Well, that is my advice as a romantic individual, romantic in terms of peace, or romantic in terms of human beings, that you still can do it. And I believe it's possible.
Thank you. Thank you, President Jose, for that inspiring, comment. I mean, we do have a lot of students here asking questions, so maybe, we could consider being succinct in our answer. I would like to maybe go to Timor-Leste now. Samuel, I see that you have raised your hands from the beginning. Please keep your questions short so that others will have the opportunity to ask as well. Samuel, please.
Thank you. Thank you, dear friends and colleagues. I'm Sam from Canberra. Currently, I'm here in the embassy, but I would rather to say that I am one of the Timorese serving the country currently here in Australia, and I want to put my perspective not as a foreign service official, but as someone who learned from the conflict and currently promoting peace and loving relationship based on our experiences. Former President Ramos-Horta and also very great emerging leader of Gino Patijalal behind this very, very interesting ideas of putting these peoples together as a young generation for the region as well as for the world to come and share the ideas about what we expect the world to be in the next couple of years or to serve us. So my great leaders or José Ramos-Horta, I think my simple question for you, some of the questions and some of your substance ideas that you put forward, I think already cover a very substantive challenges and great success of the country that made this far, especially in Asia. We're grateful for that. But looking into the couple of years, just recent couple of years, I think there has been a tendencies of military and arm raising in the region. And recent announcement of countries and reactions, I think that tendency is actually seems to be there. And as you mentioned that ASEAN centrality need to play the role, and also countries in the region that who have like money to have a peace and loving for their generation to come. What would be your key message for us as well as for the leaders in the region that despite the center of Asia that has been growing and achieving as such developments and bringing out huge poverty peoples into certain level of economy so that we can continue to grow as a leaders, young leaders, to really have the peace and moving forward despite the current challenges that we have seen and continue to see. So your key message for us, especially for the region, in order to solidify despite the differences, and we have as strong to unify despite in our differences.
Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Thank you for that. President Ramos, please.
Okay, I try to be brief because my previous answer was a bit too long. So
you're good, but we have a lot of questions, so we want to engage as many participants as possible.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yeah. Well, my answer to that is not different from what I have said earlier, and the key message or the for ASEAN leaders, and again, I hesitate to appear to be lecturing because we have more to learn. I have more to learn from them than they from me, and that is further integrate the region in every way possible in terms of people, interconnectivity among the people, more presence of ASEAN economies, ASEAN investments, ASEAN universities, ASEAN health, medical services in different ASEAN countries. Those that have resources have either technical, financial resources, and others that might have human resources, but not enough technical and financial resources. Each can contribute the way they can to set up really concrete institutions in different ASEAN countries. The different pandemics in the past have taught us about that and show us the lack of an ASEAN united approach in science, in technology, to address ASEAN challenges. I believe that ASEAN countries have already numerous other joint initiatives like early warning systems on natural disasters, because the tsunami in 2004 in Aceh taught ASEAN leaders about early warning and early responses. But there are many others, to create a really ASEAN community of people, not of officials, not only numbers. There has to be sentiment, there has to be real embracing of people throughout the ASEAN region. And that you do it through investment in education, investment in cultural exchange, investment in labor mobility. And we also have seen some ugly situations in the region caused by poverty. And when people have to flee their countries, they flock to Thailand, like Myanmar, they flock to Bangladesh. There are many illegal workers from Indonesia, in Malaysia. How to accommodate these people, treat these people with humanity, to show the real ASEAN community. So this is what I would say, but emphasize that I know much has been done, and maybe what I'm talking now is actually, it was done. But I would add, ASEAN leaders have to quickly accommodate Timor-Leste as a member. Indonesia has been one of the leading advocates of Timor-Leste joining, but so have been other countries. Cambodia, Prime Minister Hun Sen has been a great friend. His Majesty Sultan of Brunei, one of the great friends of Timor, joining ASEAN. And so have been Philippines, Thailand, and others, Malaysia. So we should join the earlier so that you complete the ASEAN integration. ASEAN, South Timor-Leste, part of Southeast Asia. It cannot be left out. Yes, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, you were not, 20 years ago, we were not well prepared. But now we are far better prepared. And I have to say, without arrogance, Timor-Leste is truly an oasis of tranquility now. We don't have a political violence, zero political violence. We don't have organized crime. We don't have ethnic, religious conflict. So many nationalities are living here, so many languages spoken here. And in spite of all the social pressures, unemployment, there is hardly any violence here. We do have time to time some youth confrontation, but we are more than ready to be part of this great organization called ASEAN.
Thank you, President Jose, for that. Now, I will share the screen with my colleague, Cindy, for a question that is from the YouTube. So, President Jose, there's a question from a participant from Indonesia who's asking us, if I'm not mistaken, there were mentions of lack of cooperation within the region when it comes to peacekeeping. So, in your thoughts, in your consideration, what are the main factors, that affects this lack of cooperation within the region?
Let me emphasize a lack of cooperation only in some key areas that I observed, and one is a lack of a joint response on the COVID pandemic. When we should have seen doctors from different ASEAN countries, healthcare workers being deployed to assist the more needy situation, the more needy communities. There is not like a scientific body in ASEAN that deals with pandemics, because pandemic is not new. It's been there for generations and generations. Maybe it was not a priority, or maybe it is there, I just don't know about. And so that ASEAN is not too reliant on extra regional cooperation or support. So ASEAN should, because there is know-how, there is financing money across ASEAN. Is a $2 trillion or $3 trillion economy, and Singapore, for instance, is one of the highest per capita in the world, and all other ASEAN countries, except for Myanmar, obviously, or maybe Laos, all the others have a great GDP and per capita. So invest in different great regional research, medical science research centers. And I know much has been done elsewhere on environment, for instance, but and that's only one thing that I see lacking. I know ASEAN has a prevention and conflict prevention and mediation mechanism, but I think it has to be much more proactive than that, working in partnership with civil society, because there are situations where government institutions are not able to do it. I led a UN panel on UN peace operations for in 2014, 2015, reviewing all the UN peace operations around the world. I was appointed by Ban Ki-moon. And one issue I kept raising in our discussion was the role of individuals, the role of civil society in conflict prevention and mediation. Because often governments are much more sensitive to accept an institutional, official role, but from within the region, by academics, by NGOs, working quietly, it's easier. And that has been already the case in some ASEAN. So more partnership between the official ASEAN mechanism of conflict prevention and mediation with experts, provide them with resources. Because when we talk about prevention, it means you study long before you alert about simmering conflicts, the roots of possible conflicts. And that can be done only discreetly by locals, by local individuals or local NGO or local think tank. But maybe this is already happening. I'm just not familiar with.
Thank you. Thank you, President Jose. I agree with you that sometimes we need to co-create with the people sector as well in order to get some outcome. We can't just, I mean, government can play the initiative, but we also need to work with the NGOs and the civil societies to contextualize the needs within the country. Maybe next, I would like to ask Malaysia. I think there's one participant here from Malaysia. Let me see if I think I have lost him. Okay, so I have someone else from Cambodia. Cambodia, I think, how do I pronounce your name? Is it Tra? Did I get it right? You can unmute yourself and start asking your question, please.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you to the president for like a lot of great informations and encouragement. I am not going to touch with the peacekeeping and also the regional cooperation, but I am back a little bit because you have sent also some messages about the leader being the humble, growing a lot of communication. So I am from Cambodia, and then growing in a society that the gap between the young and the old is still a little bit big. I mean, like it's still huge, even though up to now, they're also saying that for this country to be developed, it is important that maybe to wait until the leader in the current generation will like gone by, that the new generation will replace the old generation. But at the same time, we have seen also that the new generation who are coming into power or coming into like coming into power are those who are more likely belong to the old generation line. I could say like children or relatives and such. So sometimes it's also a kind of a lose of the hope for a certain number of people, especially the generation who even don't have a chance to study abroad and who even have a chance to learn more about the concept, how to say, like improve the country, like to say that there will be no chance for them to come back and also to contribute to the country. So my question would be, in this context, what will be your message to encourage or maybe motivate the young generation to continue hoping and then for a chance, for a possibility, and what could be the step that they should take in order to involve and contribute themselves for the society? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. President Jose, there's also a question directly sent to me, similar from Philippines by France, who's asking about what can young people do, to participate in nation and regional development. And there's also another participant from Vietnam who's also asking a similar question. What can youth do to contribute to regional cooperation and partnership? Any advice for them, President, please?
Yes, and a very straightforward, very simple. We are youth only once, meaning, you have a period of years where we are young. And don't waste this time of being youth to focus on study, and study. Not just to graduate, to be good, and not just to be better. Study to be the best in the class. Everybody has to be the best in the class so that everybody is the best in the entire country. And that's your first responsibility and opportunity. Never fall on the temptation of drugs, of abuse, of violence. As frustrated as you may be with the lack of change opportunities, learn to be patient, because these are challenges to you, to your shaping up, your personality for the future. And yes, there are no black and white answers to each situation. And unfortunately, democracies, the emerging democracies around the world, have not all been very inspiring in the sense of delivering results to the people. Democracies in many countries have become a charade, and democracy has meant only election, and someone get elected, and then he or she and his cronies and everybody else rob as much as possible because they know they have only a few years in office. And of course, they try to stay longer. But there have been countries that were not exactly democracies, but they deliver, and they have credibility. And so, each country, I understand Cambodia. I've been there. I know Prime Minister Hun Sen. I knew King Sihanouk, and the new king. I sat next to him, and between him and Hun Sen in a banquet when I visit your great country. And the reality is also Cambodia has this extraordinary tragic experience. The healing of the wounds is a tremendously difficult, take time, and anybody can criticize Hun Sen, but look at the transformation of Cambodia. Yes, there is no linear, no straight line anywhere, and so my advice: watch Hun Sen leadership, watch him how he rescued the country from the genocide era poverty to today. And you mentioned about the children of the leaders. Well, how many leaders, how many children they can groom? Anyway, some of the children are not necessarily terribly smart, and they themselves will disappear. So I don't think that is a problem. And people in any society, and they watch, and they will support those they know, those who deliver, regardless of political discourse on democracies and elections and so on. The people in their first priority when you're poor and you're waiting for social justice, for equal opportunity, and for better chance to earn 3 meals a day and then school for the children. And unfortunately, democracies in many, many countries throughout the world have betrayed us. And we know how democracy is always imperfect. Look at what Donald Trump did to democracy and it has done to democracy in the United States. So the fight for democracy is a long process with ups and downs. Anyway, and that's my answer to you.
Thank you. Thank you, President. We have another question from YouTube on YouTube chat box. Can we have the question, please? So this is on ASEAN's principle on non-interference. So based on your opinion, what are the, what is this principle, causing the lack of cooperation and limiting our ability to contribute to peace? This is a question coming from Thailand, from Nam Tawit.
Absolutely correct on the part of ASEAN leaders, ASEAN countries, in agreeing, in cherish the principle of non-interference in the political affairs, problems of member countries. I agree with that. But what is the definition of internal affairs? Because if we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if you look at the numerous international human rights instruments that are universal, torture is universally condemned. No country can justify arbitrary arrest without due process, transparent legal process, etc., etc. And torture is not the prerogative of a country. It's not a prerogative of elected or non-elected leaders. It is a crime, universally rejected. Summary arbitrary executions of people, universally rejected. As we all, as human beings, belonging to any religion, we are against that. So that's we have to be careful about the definition of non-interference, because when there is a military coup and following the military coup, hundreds of people are killed, ASEAN is right, as it did, in condemning and it trying to do everything to reverse the situation so that it doesn't betray the millions of people who believed in democracy and they voted. Easier said than done. I understand absolutely the dilemma and even the embarrassment faced by ASEAN leaders, what to do. And I don't think China itself is happy with this situation. Anyone who knows China, the Chinese leadership are obsessed with stability because they know what instability meant for their own country over decades, particularly after World War II. So they are obsessed with it because they also know a normal relationship with Myanmar required a stable Myanmar. And stable doesn't mean you stabilize the situation with brute force. Stable means also the people on the ground accept the government, accept the regime. So I think ASEAN can work closer, maybe even more actively with China, with Japan. Yes, engage the military in dialogue. And with the support from India and United States, Europeans, and to reverse the situation. And well, in any negotiation, there are compromises. there is no compromise when you defeat the other side in the military field, in the battlefield. There have been examples of that, and not only World War II, but in Central America in the 80s, when the Sandinistas in Nicaragua simply walked into the capital and Managua and overthrow the Somoza dynasty. And so there is no compromise that they took over. And but in other situations that you need to negotiate, there has to be compromise. The military will be forever part of Myanmar, at least for a long, long time. But the military cannot have a green light to repress their own people. So they too have to make concessions, following the examples of Indonesia. The Indonesian experience is a lesson for everyone. The transition from 98, 99 to one of the most vibrant democracies in the region without impacting on the credibility, the comfort, the role of the military. Today, you don't hear the Indonesian military talking politics. And so that's a lesson for Myanmar. The military can retire to the barracks, slowly reform, modernize, and let the civilians govern. But civilians have to be sensitive and with the military, listen to them, have regular meetings with them.
Okay, thank you, President Jose, for that insightful, description of ASEAN. I believe we have a question from Singapore. Can I get Ben to ask your question, please?
Hi, I'm Ben from Singapore. Firstly, I would like to thank President Jose for the insightful sharing. I have a question with regards to ASEAN losing its centrality. I'd like to ask, is it due to a weak common identity? If it is, should ASEAN develop common approach instead of just focusing on common position? Or are there any strategies to strengthen ASEAN in the development of a common identity? Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for that question. President Ramos?
Yes. Yeah, but that's what ASEAN has done over the years. Before a common position, they engage in consultation at the many levels, at senior official level, embassy level, and then they move on to foreign minister level and then to summit level. That's how ASEAN developed. So it's been always like that more and more perfected, the mechanism they use. When they talk about the ASEAN way, I understand it's precisely that a lot of dialogue. And sometimes, in spite of dialogue and they engage in, they cannot reach a consensus. One example is precisely being on Myanmar. And the first time ASEAN can split on Myanmar was not after the coup. There was a resolution in the United Nations General Assembly in New York, I think in 2017 or 18. I don't remember the year, but I was alerted to it. And I did alert some ASEAN friends to pay attention, because it could happen that the first time ever in the UN General Assembly, ASEAN countries will split, and they did split. Malaysia and Brunei and Indonesia voted differently from the rest of ASEAN on a resolution dealing with the Rohingya problem. Of course, countries like Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia did what had to do. How could ignore the tragedy of the Rohingya people during the worst of the crisis, 2017, 2018. But that's when Myanmar itself, at the time under Daw Aung Suu Kyi, was in office, and she was in an extraordinarily difficult situation. And so that was the first time that even dialogue among them, and there was open dialogue with Suu Kyi, and there was no common position. And then South China Sea, more than once, ASEAN meetings deadlocked over South China Sea. They couldn't agree on a common position. What does that mean? Require? Well, more and more dialogue, maybe more time, more patience, unfortunately, this division, this conflict in ASEAN was not of ASEAN creation. It is created by China with its 9-dash line when China expanded its maritime claims. So that's why it's difficult to have a common position, because a superpower that created this problem that divided ASEAN. So that's why I said earlier, in the create, try to have a zone of peace and cooperation in the South China Sea, demilitarize the area, free passage for non-military vessels. There should be more control of military vessels and aircraft, but precisely to avoid accidents. So everybody frees their claims. Even former president of China, Hu Jintao, I remember he said many, many years ago, he said, the South China Sea problem, maybe in 30 years from now, will be resolved. Of course, in the meantime, China imposed fait accompli with building military facilities there. But they might listen to ASEAN and the others, because China as a superpower needs more and more friends and not adversaries and enemies.
Thank you, President Jose. Maybe I'll go back to Indonesia now for a question. Maybe can I go to Indonesia? Nabila, are you there? Nabila, do you have a question for President?
Yes. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Nabila from Faculty of Public Health, University of Hasanuddin, Indonesia. First, I want to say thanks to this great sharing for today. So my question is for President José Ramos. What do you think the importance of a peace in the world of public health? Thank you.
Thank you, Nabila, for that question. President Jose, please.
Well, of course, we have a WHO, World Health Organization, who has been the leading organization throughout history, and in this pandemic, having such an organization, the World Health Organization, has helped many countries, saving lives, millions of lives, through the medical technical advice, through their regional offices, their country offices, mobilizing vaccines for poorer countries, and not with much success. Even the Director General of WHO was very angry in a recent press conference criticizing the West for failing to deliver. There should be definitely far more investment by each of us in our own countries. Maybe we are learning from this pandemic. Maybe, I hope, in Timor-Leste, we are learning from this pandemic, because this is the first time ever we confront such a pandemic, universal, that each of us put more money in public health, in health, and that means overall, health is not only therapy, treatment, it's prevention. And prevention means also health, hygiene, clean water to our communities, and so on and so on. So maybe Indonesia we have learned and will have a great science and research organization, institution for all of ASEAN. And all of will be funding. But each of the ASEAN countries, particularly the richer ones, have the resources. across Africa. And the richer countries that usually the so-called donor countries, OECD countries, maybe would learn also from this and help us developing better hospitals, research, medical research in our own countries. For each country with our own dimension. In bigger countries like Indonesia, you'd have a large institution for the whole region. In countries like Timor-Leste, we would have one. If in our scale, because our resources, our population. And that is absolutely vital. Let's the world spend less on armaments. Third world countries, Africa, Middle East, Asia, spend too much money on weapon systems, on aircraft, helicopters, tanks, not to mention nuclear weapons that I mentioned earlier. And so let's spend more on sustainable rural development, also urban development to relieve the pressure in urban areas. So that's what I would say, priority, primacy for the next years to come for me, in my country, for the developing world is this: agriculture, agriculture, agriculture. To be absolutely self-sustaining, autonomous in your food supplies, in your stock of food, across the board, from A to Z food. And of course, to do that, you need irrigation systems. If you don't have water, do rainwater catchments, desalinization, also combat malnutrition, child malnutrition, mother's health. There is a pandemic in our country for many generations, and that is child malnutrition in many countries across the world. It's abominable. In this 21st century, there is so much child malnutrition, child slavery, child labor, exploitation, ruthless exploitation of child labor in South Asia, in Ghana, in Africa, cocoa plantations to produce cocoa for Switzerland and other chocolate making countries. And that's what we should learn from this pandemic, to invest more overall, beginning with ourselves, leaders in our own countries. We have to know, to identify national policies, the priority. So for me, agriculture means food security, nutrition for babies, breastfeeding for babies, no artificial powder from Nestle and others. It's sometimes necessary. Mother milk is the best protection of babies, of children for their health. Best protection against COVID is the mother's milk. And more on education, more spending on health. These three areas: agriculture, education, and health.
Thank you, President Jose, for that. We have one last question from YouTube. We will take this question. I think this would end our session. Please, can we have the questions, please? Thank you. What are the main conditions of peace? This comes from Maria from Timor-Leste.
As I have said earlier throughout my remarks, main condition is when we look at the sources of conflict earlier, is when communities are excluded, when peoples are excluded, when people perceive discrimination, communities that are minorities, belong to different ethnic groups, they perceive discrimination, exclusion by the dominant ethnic group in the government, in the political hierarchy. And absence of dialogue and hence propagate more this perception. Because there are always people, particularly nowadays with the social media. Well, look at Myanmar. much of the violence propagated against the Rohingya and others come from social media, demonizing Muslims, demonize a lot of the social media. And so we have to be attentive to that. Leaders have to embrace everyone. Leaders have to engage in dialogue to show humility to the people, to be open-minded to each other, leaders in a particular country, whether in Timor-Leste or anywhere. That's my advice. And that's been my belief all my life, particularly. And when I came back to Timor after 24 years in the diaspora, that was I kept telling our people, my colleagues, leaders, let's be humble. Descend from the mountains down to the valleys and meet and embrace those on the periphery of power, on the periphery of privileges. Those who lost the election, we embrace them, make them feel they are part of the new regime, of the new future.
Thank you, President, for that. And thank you, everyone, for joining. We are at our tail end of our session. I mean, I'm sorry that I can't call out everyone who has raised your hands patiently waiting. I hope throughout the session, throughout the Q&A, your questions were answered in some form, right? So thank you, everyone, once again for joining the session. And thank you, President, for this wonderful enriching talk. Make sure you fill up the form that has been sent to the Zoom and YouTube chat box to confirm your attendance in the lecture and get your e-certificate. You can also connect with your fellow classmates on the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall Community Facebook page and Telegram group. The links are provided in the chat box. We will be having the 4th lecture on Building Regional Architecture lecture with His Highness Yamada Takeo, Ambassador of Japan to Vietnam on October 13th, 2021. So make sure to re-register for this lecture, right, at clecturehall.com. And with that, I would like to end this session and also thank President José Ramos again for his time, and for all the students, all the very best. And I hope that you would continue to, take on an active role in playing a part in wanting to build peace within the region and globally as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was
an
honor for me to be here and to moderate the session.
Thank you.